Hey campers, welcome back to the channel. I have a quick deck tech look for you. I have been messing around a lot with Boba Yellow. Really, since I've seen the card Cunning, I've been interested in running Boba Yellow. I've looked at some of the Boba Yellow lists, and I've not been super thrilled with a handful of the choices that are in those decks. I haven't totally loved them, and I've always wanted to play a Boba Yellow deck that does a little bit more of relying on tricks. I've also loved Jabba and really wanted to play Jabba the Hutt. Thought Jabba was a really cool card. Wanted that resource extension, and so I thought I would put together a deck, and I've had a lot of success with this deck so far. I played it against most of the decks that are kind of in that top low A, top B meta. Iden Red and Sabine Green, and Vader Green specifically. And I have found a lot of success with this deck, and I found it to be a lot of fun. Now, keep in mind, for me, I could put together Boba Green, and it would arguably, theoretically, be better than this deck in a lot of matchups. But I'm trying to make 4 decks that my friends and I could sit down and play. If I have a couple of guys over, I have a couple of beers and we want to play some games, each one of us can pick up a deck that is, viable against one another. And for me, that meant that I probably shouldn't run Boba Green on a regular, as it would take up both my Vaders and my Bobas, which does remove a lot of other things. So I have made Boba Yellow, Iden Red, Vader Green, and Sabine Green, which allows me with a singular set of Boba Fett's and a singular set of Darth Vaders to be able to run 4 pretty high-end meta decks, low A, high B. I would say Sabine in this deck are in the A tier. This might be close to S, whereas Vader and Iden Red are really high B in the A range, maybe. So all 4 good decks competitive against one another. So I wanted to show you my take on Boba Yellow, which is a little different than maybe what's out there. And so we're just going to take a quick look at this deck right here. I'm going to walk you through each of the pieces, and then once again, we're going to take a look at it in like a full format spread out. And I'll even talk a little bit about the cards that I've put in the sideboard for this. I'll take a look at those at the end. Let's take a look at the ground units first that we're going to run. And we're going to be running a lot of events in this deck. So we are going to be running in a 1 slot, just the Greedo. This, when defeated, discard a card from the top of your deck. If it is not a unit, deal 2 damage to a ground unit. It's 3/1. Does really good against aggressive strategies. You get this thing out, trade it into something. They're 1-drop, they're Battlefield Marine, they're whatever. And then oftentimes you're going to flip something that's not a leader or not a unit in this deck, and allows you to knock something else out in the early game. So you can oftentimes get a 2-for-1 with this 1-drop pretty reliably, which is a really big deal. It's our 1-drops. Our 2-drops, which of course we're going to have more of. Crafty Smuggler, not a lot to say about this card. It is the best card in our 2-drop right now. In most cases anyway. It's sticky, it gets that shield token. Probably won't be good in the long run for the game, but at least right now in the limited amount of cards that we have, it's pretty good. And then we're just going to run Viper Probe Droid as our other 2-drop, at least in the ground lane. Lets us look at our opponent's hand, has the 3 attack, lets us trade up, pretty good in the early game. You can use this in conjunction with something like a sneak attack or a shoot first. Shoot first, really good with Crafty Smuggler. We'll talk about that in a moment. And so you can trade up with this, but usually Viper Probe Droid or Crafty Smuggler, you're really happy to see in the beginning of the game. The next card that we're going to run in our 3-drop slot, we're going to run 1 copy of Cellblock card. Now that being said, I do have a couple copies of it in my sideboard in the case that you're coming up against an aggressive strategy and you need to remove some of your tricks just to have more Sentinel. In a similar way, Buddha Rook, Buddha Rook, I don't know. The Rook here, your double aspect. I'm only running a singular copy of this card as well, but I would run 2 additional copies from sideboard if I was going against maybe a control deck and I wanted to remove their ramp. Maybe I was going up in a similar mirror with maybe a Boba Green deck. I wanted to remove their ramp, or I wanted to remove their boss because they're 5-drop. I would use him. Now, the best 3-drop in the game, statistically and in all other ways, of course, Boba Fett. There's not much to say about him. Running a playset of Boba in the Boba deck, no surprise there. we want those 3 drops. Now, in a typical Boba green deck, you're not going to run 4 drops. In this deck, you're probably going to use turn 4 in a pretty similar way to how you might use turn 4 in another Boba Yellow deck, which is going to play a couple of 2 drops, or I'm going to be going in and, just stalling it for a round because there's not a lot of good 4 drops. But I'm running 2 copies of Jabba the Hutt, specifically because I'm running more events in this deck than I think a lot of other decks might be, and I'm running specifically some trick events, mainly because I want to be able to push damage into the late game with this deck by exhausting and consistently frustrating my opponent with my events. And, Jabba gives me a good way to do that. A really thick body with 8 health. All of my tricks cost 1 less. I can play this, and then immediately I can shoot first for free, which is really cool. My waylays get cheaper. A couple of my other cards you'll see are going to get cheaper as well that I really like. And then when played, you look at the top 8 cards of your deck, pick a trick, reveal it, and draw it, and then put the other cards on the bottom of your deck. So it also gets kind of that search feature that you're going to get maybe, in a Vader deck or other things. It's not going to pop stuff onto the board, but you can go and search for that shoot first, which you'll see is in our deck here in a moment. I really like Jabba. I'm only running 2 of them. I don't have any in the sideboard. 5 is one of the most important turns for a Boba deck because this is the turn that you're going to flip your Boba. You want to be able to clear something or get rid of something on this turn, which is where both of our 5 drops come in. Both Cantina Bouncer, when played, return a non-leader to its owner's hand, and Bosk, a 4/5 with Ambush that when you play an event deal 2 damage to a unit, are going to allow us to get that big turn 5 Boba play. When we play the 5 drop, we remove something or bounce something, we exhaust Boba and gain a resource back, then we flip Boba and attack with him, gaining 2 more resources back, and then playing a 3 drop. It's not super uncommon for you to play a 4/5 and then a 4/7 with Boba Fett and then a 3/5 with a second Boba Fett that you toss on the board. It's actually not all that uncommon with this deck on turn 5. You still have that exceedingly strong turn 5 play. Now let's take a look at our space units. There's not a lot because, to be perfectly honest with you, Boba Fett doesn't need a lot because of Fett's Fire Spray. We are going to run exactly what you would think. We're going to run Cartel Spacer on 2. Just going to allow us to exhaust units pretty good into the late game. I like Cartel Spacer a lot. We're going to be playing the 7th Fleet Defender, one of the best 3-drop space units in the game. That 3/2 with the shield just makes it really hard to get rid of. And then Fett's Fire Spray. Nothing too crazy here. Pretty standard list of cards in terms of what you've seen so far. But obviously, Fett's Fire Spray on turn 6 after your big 5 Boba play is extremely powerful. Very, very good. Love that. So let's take a look at the events, because I think this is where I have maybe the most uniqueness in my list, because I was trying to lean into more of playing tricks to be able to help me in the game. We're going to be running the trick shoot first. This is going to get found and discounted by our Jabba the Hutt. Just really good in the early game, either with your 7th Fleet Defender or with your Cartel Smuggler, Crafty Smuggler rather. Just get that +1 attack first, maybe not pop your shield, keep them up a little bit longer. Then I'm running 2 copies of Asteroid Sanctuary because this is a trick, and I think this card's actually really, really good. We don't have a ton of stuff that cost more than 3. A lot of our stuff is in the 3 cost. Our Cartel Spacer, our 7th Fleet Defender, if we roll down here, our Boba Fetts, our Rooks, our Cellblock Guards, our Smugglers, our Greedos, our Probe Droids. A lot of targets for this Asteroid Sanctuary to hit. And this, of course, you can search for and cost only 1 to play if you get your turn 4 play out with your Jabba the Hutt, because it is a trick. The next one is a tactic, but it's so good that you can't not play it. Surprise Strike just allows us to push for extra damage at the end, also allows us to trade up. I think you're kind of foolish if you're not running this card. So those are our first 3 events. Let's clear those out, show you the next 3 events. We're also playing, and to be clear, Surprise Strike and Shoot First, I'm playing in play sets of 3 ofs. Asteroid Sanctuary I'm only playing a 2 of in this deck. No Good to Me Dead, just a really strong card to stall the game at the late game, stall your opponent's leader out for a couple of turns when they flip them over. A lot of times on your turn 5, if you don't have a 3-drop, you're going to play a No Good for Me Dead and exhaust something and keep it exhausted. after you've readied some resources with Boba Fett, just to continue pressing that advantage as you're coming into your fire spray turn. Really, really great card, especially in this deck that's trying to stall the end game. In a very similar way, Waylay, except this is one, it is a trick, so you can search it with your Jabba, and it's going to cost 2 when your Jabba's out. Very, 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 very good at 2. Just allowing us to continue to build tempo, which is super strong. And then, of course, Cunning in the double yellow deck. We're running a playset of all 3 of these cards. Choose to, in any order, return a non-leader unit with 4 less power to its owner's hand. You're almost always going to have target for that. Give a unit +4/+0 this phase. Throw that on your Fett's Fire Spray or on your Boba Fett. Just push tons of damage. Exhaust 2 units, and your opponent discards a random card from their hand. So you have a little bit of discard in this deck, but I think that usually you're giving a +4/+0 and exhausting 2 units, just continuing to control the board, continuing to manipulate your opponent's situation, continuing to allow your stuff to survive even when they're understated in this deck. And then lastly, I'm actually running 2 copies of I Had No Choice. I really like this card against control. Now, I think some people might say you should play Change of Heart. I don't have copies of Change of Heart, but I actually like this card more. Change of Heart steals something, and then your opponent has a chance to sort of respond to that and do something about it. I Had No Choice chooses 2 non-leader units and gets rid of both of them. One's going back to hand, one's going to bottom of deck. If you're at the end of the game and your opponent drops a big Sentinel, or you're at the end of the game and you are really racing against that control deck, right? That control deck is sort of taking control of the board, but you're stalling them and offering chip damage, and you have a couple of things down. I Had No Choice is a really good card in that situation. Not only that, it is a trick, so you can search for it with your Jabba. It costs 6 when Jabba's out, which is also very good. A lot of times your opponents just aren't going to remove the Jabba the Hutt. It has 8 health. It's just too much for them to remove. They're not even going to mess with it. They're just going to let it sit there, ping at their base, and make your cards cheaper, which is very, very good in this deck, because Boba is then going to, ready resources. The hardest part about this deck is you're going to run yourself out of cards pretty frequently. You're going to be top decking, sitting at 4 or 6 resources. You're going to run yourself out of cards pretty quick. This is a really good way as a bomb, especially opening if you have initiative, to be able to remove 2 of your opponent's threats or 2 of your opponent's sentinels in one swing with a card. It serves a similar purpose to what Cunning does, but Cunning doesn't just completely remove them from the battlefield. It's just going to, freeze them up for a turn, whereas I Had No Choice is going to completely remove them from the battlefield. I really like that. And I've not seen many people play this card, but I really like I Had No Choice, and I really like him in conjunction with Jabba the Hutt. Really quickly, if we're looking at my sideboard, we're running 2 copies of Cellblock Guard. If you need to get some more Sentinel in, the Rook, if you need to get a couple more, discard mechanics in, if you're going up against maybe like a control deck and you want to remove some of their tools. The Gamorrean guards, the pig guys, or I don't know what they are. The boar guys, I guess, something like that. No, they're pigs. They're sort of like wild pigmen. Hey, a 4/4 with Sentinel for 4 isn't bad, especially because our turn 4 is pretty terrible in Boba and pretty much all iterations. And so you could run those if you're running into a lot of aggressive strategies. And then lastly, I have 3 copies of Bounty Hunter Crew in this deck. Mostly because in certain matchups, I want to be able to ambush him with a 4/4 and remove something. That's very good in a lot of scenarios. But also the ability to just go back and grab an additional copy of Cunning, or to go to grab a No Good For Me Dead, or a Surprise Strike. A lot of times the cards that you can grab with these are really good, and it gives you a little bit of extension. So I'm running these here along with these guys if you're coming up against Control, the Rook, and also the Bounty Hunter Crew. And then I'm running the guards and the Cellblock guards just if I'm running into a lot of aggressive strategies. So there you go. That's the deck. Let's take a look at it from the desktop here. If you want to take a look at the deck quickly as a whole, we've gone through all of these cards. Certainly there's a lot of stuff that could be removed or changed. But I really like this deck because in the other Boba decks, especially mono Boba, the whole goal is really to just out-tempo your opponent the whole time. That's all you're trying to do. This does have the huge turn 5 tempo play, right? It has the boss. It has the Cantina Bouncer. It has the Boba Fett leader. It has the Boba Fett unit. It has the 7th Fleet Defender. It has the Rook, right? All of the cards, the Waylay, the Cellblock card, all of the stuff. And then it can turn on in Fet's Fire Spray. But what I like about this deck is with I Had No Choice, with the Asteroid Sanctuary, with the 3 copies of Waylay, with the Jabba the Hutt, with the 3 copies of Cunning, which, to be fair, all yellow Boba decks are going to run, it allows me to extend a few of those resources against control a little bit longer, right? I can stall my opponent, even after they flip the board, even if after it's clear that they're going to take control of things, I can still stall my opponent just for a little bit in order to get those last couple pieces of chip damage in with the Surprise Strike, or with the buff on the Cunning, or getting that Fet's Fire Spray in for another attack or two. That's really what you're looking for. You're looking for flip the board, put your opponent in a really bad situation, drop the Fet's Fire Spray, and then do your best to control the board and end with as much chip damage as you can, either ending with the Fet's Fire Spray, but if they remove it, little guys freezing their board and then hitting them with the Surprise Strike or the buff from the Cunning to close out the game. And if you get far enough in and you're like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm seeing a Vader, a Palpatine, or an Avenger and something else on the board, I had no choice. Just says, hey, at the beginning of the round, I'm going to ship those things off the board. Those really high cost stuff, you know, you can get a 7-drop and a 9-drop with this thing or something and play it for 6. So much value in that to knock some stuff back to their hand and put something on the bottom of their deck just to buy yourself some time. So really enjoy this deck. It's been super fun. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Let me know if you decide to check it out. I know it's not the cheapest deck to make because you have to get the 3 Bobas at about $50 a pop. But there's a lot of cards in this that if you did not run Boba Fett, you could still run this deck, and the cards are all insanely cheap in it. I think that Boba Fett is the only one. You know, I think I Had No Choice costs next to nothing, right? I think you can get them for like $1 or $2. You know, all the other cards, $1 or $2. I think the Rook I picked up as a rare for like 65 cents the other day. I mean, crazy, crazy inexpensive cards in this deck you can pick up. The only expensive cards that you're going to rent, I think that, you know, Jabba's $1.50, $2 maybe. The Fet's Fire Sprays, $5 or $6 a pop. Those are a little bit more expensive. Maybe you trade for those because those are rares. The Cunnings, you know, I think I picked mine up. I had one. I traded Millennium Falcon for a couple copies. It's still pretty inexpensive considering how good it is. I think it's going to be really good moving forward too. I think we're just going to see more sort of double faction tools in the near future, and so I think it's a good time to pick up those Cunnings. And if you can pick them up for $10 or $12 a pop, you know, not too bad. Of course, the Boba Fett, you're looking at $50 a piece, but this is allowing you to play a what I think to be a very competitive, very strong, top A to S tier deck without having to invest the $70 to $100 a pop on your Darth Vaders, which you really do need in order to have closing power in Boba Fett Green. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the more affordable of the Boba Fett decks that are out there, and this is my take on it, running the Jabba the Hutt, and then some of the extra tricks in order to stall the game out with Asteroid Sanctuary and the 3 ofs of a couple of things, and then the little I Had No Choice card at the top end. Thank you guys for watching this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon here on the channel so you can see when we put out more footage or more videos. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next video.